Okay. So exciting to be among my academic peers. And I forgot my clicker. Did I? Yes. Okay. Got it. Okay. Okay. I put it on subtitles. I've never done that before. I didn't know that was a thing. All right, so my presentation is One Franchise to Rule Them All, Film-Induced Tourism as a Key Factor for Promoting Destination Image in New Zealand. This was really fascinating to me and very on trend with my research interests, which is okay, hold on. I am interested in the narrative change aspect, how stories can get inside people and affect the way they think and the way that they behave. And so we know a lot about okay. All right. Hold please. No? No? Ugh, fine. So we know a lot about parasocial interaction, right? This idea of creating connections with people that we don't know, that we've never met, who may not even exist in the real world, but for whatever reason we have connected with them because they think a certain way that we agree with, or they look a certain way that we think is appealing, and we dive into that, we connect to that, we make it a part of who we are. Very well documented, very well, researched over the last 60 years. Well, my question is, how does that translate to other attachments that we have in our lives? They're particularly talking about place attachment in this regard. So this article examines existing research on place attachment theory in comparison with parasocial interaction research to create a theoretical model for media consumers' attachment to places in the same way that they do people that they have never been to or are incapable of visiting. I dub this paraspatial attachment. So explanations are offered about why I chose paraspatial, and then but basically, I'm looking at the Lord of the Rings franchise and the paraspatial impact that has had on the tourist industry in New Zealand. So place attachment is very well established as a theory, particularly in environmental psychology, this idea of the attachment that we have to the places based off of our lived experience in those places. Place attachment has also been used in tourism research, specifically film-based tourism. So how do they use the films to promote the place so that you come and you see and you experience and you enjoy? And if interpersonal relationships have a meta-counterpart, it stands to reason that place attachment also has a meta-attachment counterpart. This article proposes paraspatial attachment as that meta-counterpart of place attachment. So parasocial interaction, as I said, has been very well documented all the way, 50, 60 years of parasocial interaction. And so there's a lot to work from. There's a lot of foundation to build from. And a lot of these place attachment articles just kind of skirt the surface of the idea that this might be a thing. Not all the way dedicated, because it's mostly environmental psychology that is doing this, or film tourism. They're focused on other aspects, whereas me, as a narrative behavioral scientist, my focus is the cognitive aspect and the psychological change that happens within you through the story. So the major difference, of course, is the focus of the attachment. PSI focuses on a person, while PSA focuses on a place. And in either case, those can be real or imagined. So there are tons and tons of articles on place attachment. Clark et al., Nicotera, Billig, Brown, and Darris, all of these. Luca is especially prolific in the place attachment field. She does a lot of research for in refugee situations where people have been displaced, and then the amount of attachment that they have to the location where they were displaced from, and the impact that it has on them to go back to those spaces and realize that they're no longer the same. It's no longer what you thought that it was. You kind of have, in parasocial interaction terms, we would call that the breakup, right? The parasocial breakup. This is very similar, but it's place attachment. It's not meta. It's a place you've actually been. You're attached to the idea of that place from the past that you carried over with you. There's a line of paraspatial in the way that I mean it, but it's more nostalgic than it is projected. So in my case, what I'm talking about is attachment to is attachment to places that you've never been to, that you've never experienced firsthand, that maybe you can't because they literally don't exist. Kind of to give an illustration, I'm going to give you a bit of a story from my life. When my family was planning to go to Disney World when I was 15, I was adamant that we had to go to Epcot. We had to go there. I wanted to go there my whole entire life. We had to go. It was imperative that we went. And my mom said, there's nothing at Epcot. It's the stupidest park. We're not going. And I was like, ugh. And so we didn't go. And then it was very frustrating. Well, so 12 years later, my sister was 17. She was going to graduate from high school. I said, hey, you want to go on a graduation congratulation trip somewhere? She said she really wanted to go to Disney because she was 5 when we went, and I was 15, so I remember it, and she doesn't. And I was like, cool, we're going to Epcot. And so I planned the entire thing. We went to all of the parks that she wanted to go to, and then we went to Epcot. And I was so excited because I was like, I'm finally going to get there. There's going to be like the different world or countries, and the women walking around in their kimonos, and the sushi and the tower. And I was so excited. It was going to be so great. And I got there, and it was not what I was expecting. It was extremely disappointing. It was like and just like boom, this whole inflated balloon of my perception of Epcot just blew up. And it would not have been nearly so disappointing, I think, if I hadn't had such like grand imaginings of what this was like. Because I had been to Busch Gardens in Williamsburg, and I'd seen how they laid out their different country type things, and I figure, hey, if Busch Gardens can do it this well, Disney's must be out of the world. And so I went home, and my mom's like, so how was Epcot? And I was like, it was so lame. I was like, I don't understand why I was so caught up on this idea of Epcot being what it was. And she goes, well, you've always been like that ever since you watched that show. And I was like, what show? When she told me, I remembered. But when I was a kid, and I'm dating myself here, there was a movie called The Princess and the Goblin. It was animated. It's a animated adaptation of George MacDonald's Princess and the Goblin book, and it was like an attempt to out Disney. And I love the movie. It's really terrible, but it's great at the same time. But that's not what it was. There was a 15-minute short film at the front of that VHS. And so every time I rewound it, I had to watch that. But I got so involved. It was Barbie's 50th birthday celebration at Epcot. And it was like they had this big Barbie show on the stage, and everybody was like, these two girls who were like could not have been more 90s if they had been generated by a 90s AI bot, and they were my age, and they were going around Epcot, and one of them, she was like this cute little. I think she was Korean, but I don't know. This cute little girl just going around, like visiting all these places. She did origami at Epcot, and I learned how to make a little star box. And I still remembered how to do that. I didn't remember who taught me or where I learned, but now I know. And so that whole idea of Epcot had been implanted in me when I watched and rewatched this 15-minute short when I was 7. And then, of course, I watched it so much that the VHS like fell apart, and then I couldn't watch it anymore, and it was very depressing. But I didn't remember any of that. I did remember that I needed to go to Epcot. that it was paramount that I go to Epcot. It was so ingrained in who I was as a person that it was like pulling me. And so these attachments exist, right? They're real. We've all felt that need to go somewhere that doesn't exist. How do you satisfy that need with a place that doesn't exist? Epcot's real. Epcot exists. I went to that place and I was disappointed. So we have parasocial breakups and paraspatial disappointment. So while minimal research does exist to support the foundation of strong attachments with places a person has never visited, the most applicable research comes from film-based tourism, okay? And so I found this article by Hosny et al. It researches the attachment that media consumers living in Spain have to Heidiland, which is a theme park in the Swiss Alps based off of Heidi, Girl of the Alps. And results showed a very high correlation between those who invested in the show and attachment with Heidiland specifically and Switzerland in general. None of these people had been to Heidiland. None of these people had been to Switzerland. So here I am. I feel very vindicated, right? Very vindicated over this idea that, hey, I may not be the first person to think about it. I am the first potentially person to maybe codify it. So that's kind of cool. So many locations from fantasy-based intellectual properties have been recreated in real life. That is how we scratch this paraspatial itch, right? How would we satisfy this driving need for a place that does not exist, where people can go and feel like they're existing in that space? Harry Potter World at Universal Studios. I have plans to take my 9 nieces and nephews as they age up to Harry Potter World when they're 10 and they get their Hogwarts letter, so that they can go to Hogwarts and buy all of their robes and their wands and their everything, so that they can have that experience of being in the Harry Potter world. The Pandora, probably the most recent aspect of the Disney parks, is that they just put in the world of Avatar. And guys, it's really cool. The animatronics are wild. Like, if you didn't know that was not a human person sitting there chanting for 27,000 hours a day, you would think, like, you would believe it. It's wild. The Star Wars land. Here's a little bit of a friction, right? That at Disney, at their Hollywood Studios park, they focus everything on the sequel trilogy, right? There's no prequel, there's no original, it's all sequel. And so for someone like me, who's deeply immersed in the original trilogy and who has a conditional affection for the prequel trilogy and a visceral dislike of the sequel trilogy, this was not a fun experience for me. I wanted to go there and be intimidated by Darth Vader and stormtroopers, not Darth Severus and his merry squad of whatevers. So that didn't do that for me, right? I did get to see the Millennium Falcon, and that was cool. But video games, Pokemon Go. I'm sure you guys remember that when that first dropped, it was everywhere. Everybody was existing in this world of Pokemon Go. The problem that, again, I had with it is that it wasn't a manifestation of the Pokemon world that I had wanted. I thought it was going to be that there were going to be actual gyms set up across the country, that you would go to that gym and you would get that badge and you would, capture your Pokemon. I thought it was going to be Pokemon in real life. And it's just a gigantic Safari Zone episode, which is fine, but not what I was hoping for. Hogwarts Legacy, kind of same thing. I didn't really ever play that game just because I now am an academic and I don't have time to engage in the things that I study. And then fan conventions. LeakyCon, which is one of the biggest Harry Potter conventions in the world, and Dragonsteel. I don't know how many of you might be Brandon Sanderson fans, but if you've never been to the Dragonsteel convention, wow. I mean, talk about people who get deeply immersed in their world. There was one prop vendor where they create like props for TV shows and movies and things like that, and they, on their own, because they wanted to, recreated these artifacts from these books, and they look exactly like I thought they would. It was so well done. Like, you could pick up Nightblood and carry him around. It was very cool. So findings, back to this idea of Middle Earth or New Zealand as Middle Earth. People don't go to New Zealand for New Zealand anymore. They really they don't. They go to New Zealand to visit Middle Earth, particularly Hobbiton. So one of the largest, oldest, and most popular intellectual properties in the world is The Lord of the Rings. Before the movies, the nearest equivalent that we had in our head to what it was like was medieval England. And that was mostly through parasocial attachments with J.R.R. Tolkien. We associated England with Middle Earth because J.R.R. Tolkien was from the UK. Peter Jackson, however, is from New Zealand, which I didn't know until I started researching this. And he said New Zealand has all of the things that we need to make these different areas come to life. And so he codified New Zealand as Middle Earth and Middle Earth as New Zealand. And even people who don't like the version of Middle Earth that he created, the stories, the adaptation that he did, still agree that the consensus is that it is Middle Earth in New Zealand. So I did a qualitative analysis on the official New Zealand website, looking at the different keywords that tapped into this idea of New Zealand as Middle Earth. And I came up with 42 viable keywords, 4 search result codes, 100 recurring themes, and 5 primary categories. Oh my gosh, you guys, this was so much work and I don't ever want to have to do it again. So this is the result. The most common word that cropped up across categories was Tor, followed by Hobbiton, Day, and then New Zealand. And then when we get into the results, I ran these through Atlas TI to create clusters, and it came down to 5 primary clusters: tours, Lord of the Rings, places, travel, and miscellaneous. Then I had to go through and make sure like what is being doubled up, because a lot of this had crossover. I looked at results that had the one of these keywords in the name of the title of the page, in the copy of the page, what had copy and visuals, and what had copy and visuals and title, and then what just had visuals. Things that had absolutely nothing to do with the Lord of the Rings other than the fact that they existed in New Zealand were pulling pictures and dropping names from the Lord of the Rings into their copy and into their titles, because that's how you generate tourism in New Zealand now. So Hobbiton obviously is the number one place that people search for and go to. It was the most common anything across all of these codes. And what it did, so this was really interesting, is that when they originally built Hobbiton for the original trilogy, they tore it down afterwards because it was just a set. It was on property that belonged to people. It was a working farm. And so they tore it down because nobody knew that it was going to become what it did. Well, people from all over the world came to New Zealand to visit Hobbiton. They found a working farm, and you know what they did? They started taking stuff. They started picking their vegetables and pulling things off of their home. And the people were like, oh my gosh, this is absurd. And so when Peter Jackson came back and said, hey, we want to film another trilogy, can we put Hobbiton back up? They said, yes, but this time it better be permanent. And so you can actually go into these hobbit holes, and if you have the money, you can stay in one. The next one is Weta Workshop. And this is really fascinating to me because Weta is the workshop that did all of the swords and the prosthetics and the everything, all of the physical props that were used in the films were created by Weta, the workshop. And they don't promote themselves as that. In fact, it's everybody else, all of the tourist companies that promote Weta as a stop. Hey, we have all of these tours. You guys can come here as well. And so it's really very interesting to me that they don't, but maybe they don't need to because everybody else is. But they do have these two pictures. They have an introduction video, and these are the only two references to the Lord of the Rings trilogy or the Hobbit trilogy on their website that I was able to find, which I find really fascinating because you can barely tell that that's what that is. So unlike the findings of I can't ever say that. So this is a replica. I didn't say that, but who studied the interaction between James Bond locations and the James Bond films and film tourism. Most people who went to the James Bond locations did it by accident. They were like, oh, we're in an area, we'll just kind of delve into that. There was some interaction between the local and the James Bond idea, but it was relatively minimal. Unlike that, in the Lord of the Rings and New Zealand are basically synonymous. Those businesses that do not take advantage of the connection between the two it appears to be detrimental to the success of most, if not all, New Zealand businesses, even if no direct connection exists at all. So while paraspatial attachment is still very much in its infancy, there's enough evidence to support that it exists and that it's prevalent enough to warrant further research. And that heavily location-based fantasy franchises such as the Lord of the Rings offer a unique platform from which to further PSA research between people and places that they long to visit, however impossible. So tourism-based businesses are uniquely positioned to capitalize on these associations, and other paraspatial franchises that should be explored include Harry Potter, Star Wars, and the Game of Thrones. So thank you.